In this edition of the Bucs Report, we talk about why is Tom Brady waiting until 2024 to join his Fox deal. We'll talk about the future of Lavonte David and what lies ahead for this Buccaneers team. We'll talk about all of that and more next on this edition of the Bucs Report. Let's go. Well, hello and welcome into this edition of the Bucs Report. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. You can find it on the Bucs Report. Check it out online at bucsreport.com. You can find it on YouTube. Just search for the Bucs Report. And of course, you can find this audio podcast wherever you find your audio podcasts. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Bucs Minutecast. So in this edition of the Bucs Report, we're happy to have Evan Winter on the show. Evan, welcome to the show.
What's up, Dan? Hope you're doing well, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
Thanks for being on. So on my drive home from work, I know I'm not supposed to be reading, but I got a notification on The Athletic that Tom Brady officially files for retirement paperwork with the NFL. This story in The Athletic: Tom Brady filed a letter with the NFL and the NFLPA confirming his retirement and making him eligible for the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2028. A league source confirmed to The Athletic. ESPN's Adam Schefter was the first to report. So what are your thoughts on it? It seems like he is a bit non-committal. I guess this makes it seem a little bit more realistic that it's going to happen. But given the fact that he doesn't want to start his Fox deal until 2024, it just seems a bit odd, doesn't it to you?
Yeah, mostly because there's kind of a hidden layer to the story that, if you pay attention to the Buccaneers, which obviously we do, but there was a popular thought going around, and it was completely logical, that Brady would wait until he would sign a one-year deal once free agency started with the Buccaneers. It would be for the veteran minimum, which I believe this year is like 1.65 or something like that. And then after June 1st, he would then file his paperwork. The Buccaneers would then be able to declare him as a post June 1st release. And then that would have saved $24 million on this year's cap. But when you look at it in the long run, the Buccaneers don't need $24 extra million in June. They need it in March when they're re-signing their crop of free agents. No players are going to sit around and wait until June to get their new contract. So the timing didn't really make sense. At the end of the day, though, the Bucs definitely lose out because they really, really needed that money this year, even if it wasn't going to come until June. You figured something could have gotten worked out. But, yeah, it looks like – and the wild part about Adam Schefter's tweet, granted, there's been a little bit of pushback on from a couple other people like Brad Spielberger at PFF, who's a really big renowned cap and analyst and stuff. They're saying there's still some wiggle room that could still happen, but Adam Schefter on his tweet says it silences Brady's move today, silences any questions about his return. So it sounds like things are pretty much done from this point on.
Yeah, it is a bit of an interesting thing. And, one of the issues at play is that Greg Olsen, that we know is one of the analysts for Fox, said some wonder whether he'll work for Fox. However, it's hard to imagine Brady or anyone walking away from $375 million. Greg Olsen on Tom Brady postponing TV career. I'm glad Sunday won't be my last game with TV's number one team. So some are speculating that possibly they thought that, maybe Tom Brady didn't have this out of his system. It's easy to say in February that I'm done, but once that muscle memory and everything starts coming back in August and, OTAs are kicking in, I think he's going to start missing it. And it's, he's done this his whole life. So it is going to be interesting for him to transition to the next part of his life. I know he's taking a year off, but ultimately it's got to be kind of an odd feeling for him, being that he's done this his entire life.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, you think about it, what was the stat that came out a few months ago? I think it was right before the Cowboys playoff, matchup, but they said Tom Brady has spent more of his life in the NFL than he has anywhere else, and that right there just goes to show you that if you've spent more of your life in one setting than you have anywhere else, oh, it's gonna be a major adjustment, and, just to think of the ultra level of competitiveness that he was constantly putting himself through, constantly getting out of his teammates, and then also getting from the guys on the opposite side of the ball, because who doesn't want to beat Tom Brady in the last 20 years? Just that entire environment. Yeah, it's going to be a major change. And yeah, it's probably going to take about a year to decompress and kind of move away. It reminds me a lot of Bruce Arians after he retired. He went into the booth in 2018, and that entire season, he just kept talking about every game he did. He talked about the itch and wanting to get back and stuff like that. So maybe Brady's kind of trying to distance himself so he doesn't fall back into that, wanting to play. Either way, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how this next year unfolds with him, or unfolds for him rather, especially after everything he went through last year. I mean, personal life aside, last year was the one year that Tom Brady first time at 3-5, first 3-game losing streak. I mean, just all of these first time bad negative things that never happened to him in his career. They happened to him last year, and they came in droves too. So I think, yeah, just take this year to decompress, figure out what you're going to do with Fox, and that makes a lot of sense. But as we all know, only time will tell.
So you know that he did get divorced from Giselle this past season, but it's interesting that he said that he actually confided or consulted in her
Mhm.
about his future. So it seems like their relationship is ultimately still amicable. But Tom Brady does leave behind a pretty illustrious career. Brady retired from the NFL for good last week after 23 seasons. The quarterback spent 20 years with the Patriots and won 6 Super Bowls with the franchise before going to the Buccaneers in 2020. Brady, 45, retired with 89,214 career passing yards, 649 touchdowns, and a 64.3 completion percentage. He has a deal with Fox as a broadcaster, like I said, for $375 million over 10 years. You got to think that he's going to bring more to the table than Tony Romo does. At first, he was good, but he's kind of getting goofed on. I was listening to the Rick Stroud podcast, and they're talking about he's not adding a little bit more. He's like, he's passing the football, and he almost got it. They're hiring these guys to do color commentary, and Troy Aikman and out there, I think, brings a lot more to the table. You got to think with Tom Brady being an analyst for Fox, he is going to be able to see things that a lot of us other fans aren't able to see.
For sure, and yeah, the shtick with Romo, it was cool, like you said, the first, year or 2, however long he's been doing it at this point, but he's definitely gotta evolve and figure out more ways to do his broadcast. But going back to Brady, yeah, and the cool thing about Brady that we've seen, especially since he came to Tampa Bay, is he has a really good personality. He's a funny dude, he has a good sense of humor. We never really saw that side in New England, and yeah, I think just to be able to, naturally hone that in and apply it during real time moments during a broadcast, like the football games he's going to be doing, especially during the biggest moments. Yeah, he should really be able to catch on and offer a lot of good insight. And I can't wait till he's calling games, because it's going to be pretty cool to hear what he has to say.
And it is always interesting, even when Aikman, he is in the booth and he's making calls. It's an interesting thing. They're watching the game and they don't have the playbook, but they've played for so long. They'll say, well, this is going to happen next and that's going to happen next. And it does happen. So it is pretty impressive. You got to think that Tom Brady will have an equally good skill set as that's concerned. One of the other things that I heard about him as well is that once he goes to the booth, that's it. Rarely do you see players kind of, go into broadcasting and then come out of it. But one of the interesting things, if all this paperwork, like we talked about, goes forward, is that before this, the speculation was that he says that he's going to be done. But what's to say, San Francisco, if their quarterback got injured again, since they have a long history of doing that, if all of a sudden he doesn't try to come back like Superman and save the season, I guess this makes it a little bit more final now. But you got to think to a certain extent that he's having a hard time letting go of that option. Even if he does go ahead and file this paperwork, I do think that must be pretty bulletproof.
Yeah, I'm never gonna say never when it comes to, what he wants to do with his career, especially since we saw last year he can still play. He's still a good quarterback. Now, granted, he needs a lot to go right around him. He can't just put a team on his back and carry a team anymore. He's got to have a good setup. But yeah, I'm never ever gonna completely, sell the ship down the river when it comes to Tom Brady's career. However, right now, if I had to put money on him coming back or staying away and staying retired, I'd definitely put money on staying retired. It definitely seems like he's done.
So after the break here, we are going to talk about the offensive coordinator position. It just seems like this position's been vacant for a while, but ultimately I think the Bucs are planning out their options. We'll talk about that next. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Bucs Report. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. In this episode, we are joined by Evan Winter. In this next segment, we're going to talk about the offensive coordinator position, Byron Leftwich, and, kind of the debacle of last season, predictability. There were so many pejoratives used to describe him. Ultimately, what changed in him? Because he was still the same offensive coordinator that was there the season that they won the Super Bowl. How did he lose favor, and how did he get to be so predictable?
Yeah, if we look back at the entire Byron Leftwich era, which, obviously coincides with the Bruce Arians era since 2019, there are a lot of ups and downs, even though there was overall a lot of success. We forget this team, or a lot of people, not we, but a lot of people tend to forget this team was 7-5 in 2020 with Tom Brady under center going into the bye week. They had just lost two in a row. They had a lot to figure out. They got beat down by the Saints 38-3 at one point in time. The offense was good, but it was primarily good against bad defenses. Then they righted the ship, obviously went on the 8-game run, so on and so forth. But even last year in 2022, when the injuries started to pile up, remember the Jets game? They were down 24-10 at one point to them, and the Jets had an awful defense last year. They struggled against Washington. Even against the Giants, they had some issues. So there's always been some bumps in the road when it comes to a Byron Leftwich offense and also a Bruce Arians offense until last year. And I do think last year a lot of the missing players, you lose Ali Marpet, Ryan Jensen goes down, Donovan Smith struggles all year long. You lose Antonio Brown, you lose Gronkowski, Chris Johnson, Chris Godwin is on the way back from a torn ACL. He ends up missing a few games early on. There were a lot of pieces that were missing. However, a good coordinator, a good coach, as we saw with Kyle Shanahan in the quarterback position with the San Francisco 49ers this year, they're going to find a way to at least overcome that stuff. Now, you might not be the 30-point per game juggernaut that the Bucs were over the last 2 years, but you shouldn't be scoring 18 points a game. You shouldn't be averaging 75 yards a game on the ground when it comes to your running game, and you shouldn't be just doing little dink and dunk passes, running a screen on every other 2nd and 7. He had no creativity and no ability to overcome the missing pieces and the lack of talent that he had the prior 2 or 3 years. You could even harken back to 2019, and not to completely steal from Scott Reynolds' A Pewter Report, but he put it perfectly. Whenever all of these guys, your AB, your Gronk, your Godwin, your Evans, even your Lenny in the backfield and your Rojo in the backfield at times, when you had all of these guys plus the offensive line, when you had all of these guys, you had room for error. You didn't have to be creative because the matchups took over the game themselves. Now all of a sudden you're missing three of those guys, four of those guys, if you want to count Jensen as well. You've got a bum Chris Godwin. You've got whatever went on between Mike Evans and Tom Brady, that just whole lack of chemistry this year. It was just a cumulative effect of a lot of different things that Leftwich couldn't overcome. And it showed his weaknesses, and it showed that, yeah, he's not creative. And at the end of the day, that's what spelled his doom.
So they are interviewing different offensive coordinators, ultimately quarterback coaches. At this point, the Bucs search for offensive coordinator will continue with Seahawks quarterbacks coach Dave Canales and of course Dan Pitcher from the Bengals. For me, it seems like the front runner has to be Pitcher, just based on what he did with Burrows in Cincinnati. I think that for me, that's got to be a front runner. Of all the different options in the interviews that you've seen thus far, do you have a favorite for the new offensive coordinator for the Bucs?
I definitely like Pitcher a lot. It's weird with him though, because after his first interview, the Bengals extended him. Now, obviously, he's interviewed again here
Right.
recently, so Yeah, that whole dynamic is strange. But yeah, when you look at just up and coming, track record, stuff like that. Either Keenan McCardell, I like what he did in Minnesota a lot last year, especially, he's been wide receivers coach up there. So he's been grooming Justin Jefferson these last few years. A lot of direct success there. I like Keenan McCardell and plus he's a newer name. I'm not a fan of retreads. I don't like bringing in old OCs that have been around for a ways. And I mean, like, look at Ed Donatel and the Vikings last year. I mean, that's case in point how that could just completely blow up in your face. But pitcher definitely represents. I like what Cincinnati does on offense. They have a good mix of running out of shotgun. They like to throw the ball deep, but they also use the intermediate game to their advantage. So, and plus working with Burrow, obviously you see as a coach when it comes to working with players like that, what to look for when it comes to those traits of greatness in other players. So that obviously could translate over. Um, but in terms of the whole contract thing with the Bengals, yeah, you just got to wonder, like, especially with the interest in Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan. Callahan could find another job somewhere. Pitcher would step right up, become the OC there, and he's still got Joe Burrow. He's still got T. Higgins. The difference right now between the Bengals and the Bucs is obviously quarterback. So you interested to see how that officially plays out. But yeah, I like Dan Pitcher. I like Keenan McCardell, and honestly, I would like Todd Monken too. Um,
Um,
I think he would. I think he would definitely bring the explosive play back to the Bucs. However, I do think he's still more of that pro style system, and I would like, especially now that Tom Brady's not in the fold, I would like to see the Bucs kind of lean into that more trendy outzone Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur type scheme because there's a lot you can do with that type of offense whenever you're facing today's NFL defenses.
So you take a look at it. Pitcher has had success. I mean, you take a look at how the Bengals did. Obviously, they didn't get the result that they wanted, but they've been competitive the last couple years here. So whoever the new offensive coordinator is, it's going to be with a new quarterback. You take a look at Trask, who's been redshirted his entire career. Ultimately, we don't know what we have in Trask, right? So we don't know, are the Bucs going to go into the free agent market? One of the things I saw here was Bucs Nation had a mock draft where they picked in the third round Hendon Hooker, a quarterback out of Tennessee. Just taking a look at the different options are out there. It seems to me a bit foolish for them to want to go out and draft a quarterback when they already drafted a quarterback. He's just been waiting in the wings. Or do you think it's going to be that they're going to sign kind of a grizzled old veteran to come in here to be as kind of a mentor and have him and Trask battle it out for the starting job?
Yeah, they're definitely going to have to bring in some kind of affordable veteran. And now with Byron Leftwich being out of the picture, I don't think that's going to be Blaine Gabbert because obviously the biggest thing about Blaine Gabbert over the last 3 or 4 years and why the Bucs kept bringing him back was because they said he knew the offense better than anybody else. He taught Tom Brady a lot of things. Obviously, there's no use for that anymore. The offensive system is gone. Tom Brady's gone, so Blaine Gabbert's gone. He's not coming back.
Right.
So yeah, you're gonna have to find somebody who's got some veteran experience, who's had some success in the NFL, and who's affordable. And I actually wrote about him yesterday, but Jacoby Brissett is the perfect candidate for that. Had a very, very solid year last year. Now, granted, it's not going to blow anybody out of the water in terms of stats, but in terms of cerebral quarterback play and efficient quarterback play, he can certainly provide that, especially if he has some weapons around him. And the Bucs do have weapons. Now, one reason why he didn't have to shoulder as much of a load last year was because of the Browns running attack, and the Buccaneers running attack, let's be honest, needs a lot of work. But a huge reason why it struggled was because of Byron Leftwich and his play sequencing and his lack of creativity in the running game. Well, that's gone. That main problem is gone. So, you reason to think that overall Tampa Bay's running game should be much more improved this year, even though if we're talking about a low bar from last year. And then when it comes to the draft, I do think they need to draft a quarterback, but not until late. A 5th, 6th, 7th round type guy. Maybe you get lucky with Brock Purdy, like a Brock Purdy type situation, though, even though I think that's more of Kyle Shanahan's coaching that led to Purdy's
Right.
success, as well as the weapons around him. I mean, that great offensive line, you got Deebo Samuel, you got Christian McCaffrey, you got George Kittle. There was a lot that worked well for Brock Purdy. But you still need to have, because Kyle Trask just right now, based off of what we've seen, I'm not going to say he'll never be a good quarterback, but based off of what we've seen so far, you can't think that right now. So you definitely need to bring in some good quality options that is within the realm of logic and within the realm of what you can afford. They definitely need to bring in definitely a veteran and probably draft another kid just to be safe.
So one of the names that's been circulated out there is Carr. Of course, he had his second visit with a division rival, the Saints. Do you think Carr would be a good fit? I see that there's a lot of talk on Twitter. People are bummed out that he's had this second meeting with the Saints. I've heard that name out there. I've also heard Garoppolo. You mentioned a player there as well, but are there just kind of widen the lens here a little bit? Who would you like to see, or who are some good options for the Buccaneers at the QB position?
Yeah, so Brissett's definitely my number one. Obviously, I just spoke about him, so no point in repeating myself on that. But yeah, when it comes to Derek Carr, man, I wouldn't mind having him. He's a solid player. I think he's a 13 to 16 ranked quarterback. Right there, right around the average mark. But for 40 million a year, no way. I am not going down that road. And the reports are right now that he's not really willing to negotiate on his salary. And why would you? If you're due $40 million, why would now? Obviously, you can turn that into a signing bonus, push it down the road, and he will still get his $40 million this year. But I'm just not taking him on for that price. Absolutely no way. They're saying Geno Smith is going to make around 30 million a year, which just absolutely blows my mind because granted, he had a very good year last year, but that is the only good year out of his entire 10-year NFL career. But a lot of it is also just the result of the quarterback market. You can't get just an average quarterback for less than 25 or 30 million dollars these days. It just doesn't happen, and that's just a result of the market. That's just how these things are priced. Cadillacs are priced from 60 to $80,000 a pop.
Right.
Toyotas are, it's the market. It's just what things demand. So, when it comes to the free agents out there in terms of quarterback, yeah, you're very limited, especially with your cap space and everything they've got going on. If there's a way that they could get Derek Carr for, sign him to some kind of deal for, and now obviously how it's all structured, blah blah blah. But if they could get him for on a yearly basis, excuse me, around 20 to 25 million, then that, in my opinion, is perfect. It doesn't need to be a $40 million per year average. It needs to be more 20, 25 million. But as the old saying goes, do one activity in one hand and wish in the other and see which one fills up quicker. So, but outside of those two, I mean, you've got guys like Andy Dalton. I would rather take Jacoby Brissett over him. You've got Mason Rudolph, Case Keenum. You've got Teddy Bridgewater. Garoppolo is somewhat of an intriguing option, but he just can't stay healthy either. He's got health issues. And then you've got a guy like Baker Mayfield, who just has not impressed. He's been through some rough stuff. He's been through some rough stuff, but he hasn't overcome the rough stuff like a number one overall pick should. So at the end of the day, I feel like Jacoby Brissett is the best overall options when it comes to play and pay. And there are definitely some other guys they can look into. But if I had to tier it and structure it and say this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, I'd go Jacoby Brissett. Then I would probably go Jimmy Garoppolo, even with the injury issues. Then I would probably take a shot at Case Keenum, maybe Daniel Jones, and then maybe in a crazy, crazy world, maybe a Cooper Rush. So outside of those guys, though, just in terms of price market, what you're going to get in terms of production, it's tough. It's definitely tough.
So, it is an interesting position for the Bucs to be in because they had the greatest of all time at the QB. No one really thought it was going to be happen, but Jason Light is going to have his hands full with trying to make that decision. But it's not just the quarterback position. Teams hit the hardest during free agency. Not only do the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have plenty of expired contracts in the unit, but the list also includes two of the NFL's best free agents, linebacker Lavonte David and corner Jamel Dean. So, Lavonte David and bringing Dean back, that's got to be another one. But just taking a look even a bit further down, Anthony Nelson, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Mike Edwards, Keanu Neal, just a lot of players that I guess I'm going to have a hard time the Bucs moving on from if, in fact, they can't bring them back. There was a true magnetism to Tom Brady that a lot of these players wanted to come here because they knew they had a pretty good chance of winning a Super Bowl. Of those free agents, what is your priority? For me, it's Lavonte David. And then, you take a look at it, and then it's Dean. And I want Murphy Bunting back here as well. who are some of the players that the Bucs must bring back?
Yeah, right now I think you make a good point with Lavonte David, but I think right now the number one guy is Jamel Dean because if you look at the overall structure of the Bucs secondary as it currently stands, Carlton Davis is the only guy from last year, or sorry, Carlton Davis and Antoine Winfield Jr. are the only two guys returning from the starting five players in the secondary from last year. Logan Ryan's doesn't have a contract. Mike Edwards, as you just mentioned, doesn't have a contract. Obviously, Jamel Dean doesn't have a contract. Obviously, Sean Murphy Bunting. So I mean, you got to find good quality, especially with how secondary oriented this defense is. Todd Bowles puts a lot on his secondaries. He needs a lot. He needs his secondaries to do a lot for the defense as a whole. I think Jamel Dean and a lot of people can argue, and I think a lot of these people are right. I think you can make a case that Jamel Dean is a better corner than Carlton Davis. And right now, sorry, I don't know why my voice is giving out. Hold on one second. All right, sorry about that. But I think you can make a case that Jamel Dean is a better corner than Carlton Davis. And right now, Spot Rack, the free agent website, they have him valued at a higher annual average salary than what Carlton was signed to last year. So just in terms of this defensive makeup and what Todd Bowles needs out of the secondary, I definitely think you got to go Jamel Dean. Lavonte David would definitely be second just because we saw how much Devin White struggled, 2 years ago without Lavonte in the lineup. And I mean, Devin had a decent year last year, but he also had a really bad string of games where that inferior play that we saw, trying to start creeping back, it was wide open, and he was the source of controversy there for a few weeks. So Lavonte David, and then you've got to find something to do with the defensive line because right now you only have Vita Vea and Logan Hall coming back.
Right.
Akeem Hicks is gone. William Golson is gone. Nacho is gone. I mean, like there's decisions to be made at almost every single level of this team. So, but right now I think just in terms of again, with how the secondary, how important it is with Todd Bowles' defense, I think Jamel Dean has got to be your number one priority.
Yeah, so I mean, it is interesting. After this season, it might not even be a recognizable team than the Super Bowl team, shall we say? So, but change is good sometimes, I guess, as long as it helps the team.
Yeah.
So, on some other big news there as well, Ronde Barber will now be the fourth member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame for the Bucs 2002 Super Bowl champs, joining Warren Sapp, Derek Brooks, and John Lynch. So, just a really great moment for Ronde Barber to get that recognition. I saw all kinds of things on Twitter, people saying if he doesn't get in and we're going to riot. So definitely a polarizing player, and people loved him in Tampa.
Yeah, it was great to see, and he absolutely deserved. I put out a tweet earlier today. He leads every single cornerback that's ever played in the NFL. He leads all of them in combined tackles, sacks, tackles for loss. He's 11th all time among all cornerbacks in interceptions. He's got 14 defensive touchdowns over the course of his career, which I think is like fourth amongst all defensive backs. Obviously, he's got the Super Bowl ring. Obviously, he's got the shutting down the vet moment, which is one of the most iconic plays in the NFL and is the most iconic play in Buccaneers franchise history. Just all of these accolades, all of these moments, he helped build, the competitive Bucs teams that we saw from around 96 to 2008ish. Oh God, I can't even believe I brought up the 2008 season. But anyway, yeah, it totally deserved. And when you look back at the Hall of Fame classes that have been established and elected since 2018, you kind of understand why he didn't get in. Outside of last year. Last year he should have gotten in. The class last year was not very, very good. But the previous 5 classes before that, I mean, you had guys like Randy Moss, Terrell Owens, Brian Dawkins, Brian Urlacher. You just had all like Peyton Manning, Calvin Johnson. I mean, you just had all these just major, major names that even though Ronde definitely deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, you can make an argument for the other guy as to why they deserve to be in over Ronde. So it was tough. He faced a pretty tough sled of classmates over the last few years, as we could say. But yeah, it's well deserved, and it is time. Now, either way, it is about time that he got in.
And it's great that he did get that recognition, as I say, just loved on the
Mhm.
Buccaneers and loved amongst the fans. Evan, I want to thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the Bucs Report. Why don't you tell all of our listeners where we can find your work?
Yeah, you can find me on azsports.com, and then you can find me on Twitter, Evan_A2Z.
All right, Evan, once again, I want to thank you for joining us on this edition of the Bucs Report, and I'll talk to you again next time.
Thanks, Dan.